I never thought I'd be the person my family whispered about behind closed doors. The ungrateful granddaughter, the manipulative outsider. I never imagined I'd become the reason for a family war that tore everything apart. My name is Meline Foster, and at 28, I didn't think I'd be the villain in my own family's story. But if you want the truth, if you really want to know how someone ends up disinvited from her own grandmother's will reading, then listen closely because I showed up anyway. And what happened in that conference room changed everything. They thought they could cut me out. They told me, we already divided everything. You weren't invited for a reason. But the lawyer didn't see it that way. He looked around the room and said, actually, her name is the only one in the will. Silence, shock, fury. That moment was just the beginning of the real fight. Because standing up for someone's last wishes isn't easy. Especially when that someone is the only person who ever truly saw you. If you've ever felt shut out by people who should have cared, if you've ever been accused of things you didn't do just for daring to stand up for what's right, you'll understand why I'm telling this story. This isn't about money. It's about loyalty. It's about truth. It's about keeping a promise to the woman who raised me when no one else would. If you want to hear more stories about real family betrayals, hard choices, and fighting for what matters most, subscribe to Avenged Stories so you don't miss any of them. Story begin. So, let me take you back to the Sunday afternoons in Grandma Celeste's old Victorian on Beacon Hill. Back to when I thought love was simple. Back before I learned that sometimes the people who say we're family are the first to draw blood because you can't understand why I walked into that lawyer's office ready for war. Until you know why I refused to let them erase me from her final words. She wasn't just my grandmother. She was my second mother. My confidant. The one who taught me to see people for who they are, not what they can give me. And in the end, she left everything to me. Not because I asked for it, but because I was the only one who never did. So, if you're ready, I'll tell you how it all happened. Every lie, every betrayal, and the promise I refused to break. I still remember the way the old Victorian on Beacon Hill smelled on Sunday afternoons. Fresh baked cinnamon rolls, coffee brewing in that battered enamel pot, roses from the back garden arranged in a chipped ceramic vase. It wasn't a mansion designed to impress guests. It was a home that felt like it had a soul. That house was Grandma Celeste. She had a way of making space for you. No matter what you carried in the door, joy, grief, confusion, she had room for it. When my dad, Daniel Foster, died of a brain aneurysm, I was 12. One morning, he just didn't wake up. My mom, Linda, did her best. She was a nurse who picked up double shifts, sometimes triple. The bills piled up while the grief sat like lead in our chests. I don't think I even understood at that age how much she was sacrificing for me. I just knew she was tired all the time. That's when Grandma Celeste stepped in. She didn't ask. She just told my mother, Meline will stay with me part of the week. That's settled. So that's what we did. Half my life in our tiny second-floor apartment with the peeling linoleum and half at that creaking old house in Beacon Hill. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe. Some nights I'd lie awake in the guest room under that faded quilt, listening to the wind rattle the old windows, feeling somehow like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. She'd call me into the kitchen while she cooked, her hair pinned up haphazardly, her thin fingers coated in flour. "You're like me," she'd say. tapping my nose with her spoon. You see people for who they are, not for what they can give you. And I just smiled because I didn't really know what she meant yet, but I felt it. I felt seen in a way I hadn't since Dad died. She never treated me like a burden. She treated me like family should. That's the part people don't understand when they hear about what happened later. They think it was about the inheritance, but it wasn't about the money. It was about those Sundays. It was about being a scared 12-year-old who didn't know how to be okay and a grandmother who decided I wouldn't have to figure it out alone. And it's important you know that before I tell you how everything went wrong because you have to understand why I fought so hard for her. You have to know what it meant to me just to be hers. But even then, even during those perfect afternoons, there were cracks forming in the family. The kind you don't see until it's too late. Because not everyone looked at that house and saw what I did. And that's where this story really begins. So, let me tell you about them. About the people who never understood her and never really tried. They say families are complicated, but that's putting it too kindly. Our family was split right down the middle, and you could see it every time we sat around Grandma Celeste's long oak dining table. On one side, there was me, the nurse, the caregiver, the one who thought being there mattered more than being rich. On the other side, Uncle Greer, Aunt Valerie, Connor, and Alexa. If you met them at a fundraiser, you'd think they were charming. Greer with his well-tailored suits, always name-dropping clients in golf clubs around Boston. Valerie with her perfect hair, expensive jewelry, and that brittle little laugh. Their kids, Connor and Alexa, were polished like showroom models. They both went to top-tier business schools. They used words like synergy and ROI at the dinner table. It used to make me want to crawl out of my skin. I remember one Thanksgiving in my early 20s. The air outside was so cold, the windows were fogged up, and the turkey smelled amazing. Uncle Greer poured himself some top-shelf bourbon and swirled it like he was auditioning for a commercial. Then he turned those calculating eyes on me. Meline, he said, why would someone as bright as you waste your life in hospice care? You could work for the family firm. Actually, make something of yourself. I laughed. That was my first mistake. Because then he really leaned in. One phone call from Celeste and you'd be set for life. But you'd rather change bed pans for dying people. My cheeks burned so hot I thought I'd combust right there. I remember gripping my fork so tight my knuckles turned white. I want to earn my own way, I told him quietly. He scoffed. Actually scoffed. Connor and Alexa exchanged that look. The one rich kids get when they can't comprehend why you wouldn't want to be rich, too. Alexa even asked me once, dead serious, but don't you want to be comfortable? I didn't even know how to answer because their idea of comfort was never worrying about the heating bill. Never seeing your mother collapse from exhaustion after a double shift. Never sitting next to someone taking their last breath and holding their hands so they wouldn't be alone. We didn't speak the same language. And I think Grandma Celeste saw that too. She watched it all in those family gatherings, saying little but missing nothing. She was the kind of person who wore cardigans from thrift shops even though she had a six-figure bank account. She volunteered at food banks, wrote quiet checks to the hospice center where I worked, and spent Christmas mornings baking cinnamon rolls to deliver to shootin' neighbors. Her children couldn't understand that. To them, the house in Beacon Hill was an asset, not a home. Her lake house in New Hampshire was dead equity. They'd never sit on the rickety old porch swing in the summer, watching fireflies and feeling like you didn't need anything else in the world. And for me, those places weren't just properties. They were proof that love could be enough. That you didn't have to be flashy or ruthless to have value. But sitting there listening to Greer sneer and Valerie laugh along, I realized I was the odd one out. And maybe Grandma realized it, too. Because even then, I think she was paying attention, testing us. Watching who cared about her as a person and who just saw her as a bank account with a pulse. That Thanksgiving was when I first really knew that this wasn't going to end well. That we weren't just different people. We were on a collision course. And soon enough it would all come to a head. I think if you asked Uncle Greer, he'd tell you the real trouble started with the lake house. But the truth is, it started long before that. Still, that meeting was the first time the cracks in our family's carefully curated image split wide open. It was 3 years ago. I remember the drive up to New Hampshire vividly. The winding 2-lane roads lined with maples that turned fire red in the fall. The lake house itself was old, built before modern heating with creaky floorboards and a stone fireplace that smoked if he didn't set it just right. It wasn't worth much on paper, but it was priceless to Grandma Celeste. She'd spent summers there since she was a kid, fishing off the dock, reading on the porch swing, making ice cream in one of those old hand-crank churns. I loved that place, too. It felt like stepping out of time, like you could actually breathe. When she invited us all there to discuss her care, I should have known it was a setup because when I walked in, there wasn't just family in the living room. There was a realtor, a skinny guy in khakis with too perfect hair who kept nervously glancing at the folders in his hands. Greer clapped his hands together like a motivational speaker. Good. We're all here, he said. Let's talk about selling this place. Selling it like it was a used car. He started talking about maintenance costs, underutilized assets, and how the market was really hot right now. I remember looking over at Grandma Celeste. She sat there back ramrod straight, face like stone. But I saw the way her jaw tightened. So I said it. Has Grandma agreed to this? Greer didn't even look at her. He waved his hand dismissively. Mother understands it's the practical choice. She can't use it anymore. I couldn't believe it. Actually, I said slowly. We just talked last week about her wanting to spend a few weeks here. This summer. The room went dead silent. Valerie cleared her throat. Meline. Dear, perhaps you misunderstood. Mother knows her limitations. That's when Grandma Celeste spoke. Quiet but cutting. I did say that to Meline. I have no intention of selling my lake house. I'll never forget the way the realtor gathered his stuff and practically ran for the door. The moment he was gone, Greer turned on me. You always do this, he spat. You think you know what's best just because you spend more time here. I tried to stay calm. What I understand, I said, voice shaking, is that Grandma should decide what happens to her property. He got so close I could smell the bourbon on his breath. Listen carefully, he hissed. You may think you're special to her. But you're pushing your luck. Don't forget who built this family's wealth. It sure as hell wasn't your father. That one hit me in the chest like a punch. Because my dad, Daniel Foster, wasn't rich. He was a high school teacher who loved what he did, who loved me. Gregor wanted me to feel ashamed of that. And in that moment, I did, but only for a second. Then I felt something else. Anger, resolve. I turned and left. Without saying another word because I knew right then this wasn't going to be the last time they tried to make decisions for Grandma Celeste without her consent. It was the first open battle in a war that would tear us all apart. But the worst part, it wasn't just that they didn't respect her wishes. It was that they truly believed they deserved her things more than I ever could. That her love was something to be converted into cash, that I was the obstacle to their plan. That day at the lake house was when the lines were drawn. And even though we all pretended afterward that everything was fine, we all knew it wasn't. We all knew the next fight was coming. After that day at the lake house, I could feel the shift. It wasn't a sudden explosion. Nothing so obvious. It was colder than that. Quieter, like a draft under a door you don't notice until you're shivering. Uncle Greer didn't confront me again to my face. Instead, he let the whispers do the work. I'd hear it secondhand. She's manipulating Celeste. She's just there to make sure she gets a bigger piece. It felt like being cast in a role I didn't audition for. The greedy granddaughter, the schemer. Never mind the fact that while they were on vacation in Aspen or Turks and Chows, I was helping Grandma Celeste up the stairs, balancing her medication schedule, making sure she actually ate dinner instead of lying about it, but they didn't see that or they didn't want to. I remember that Christmas I wasn't invited. They said, "We're keeping it small this year for Celeste's health." Small apparently meant everyone except me. I found out when Alexa posted a group photo online. There they all were smiling in front of the fireplace. Gregor carving the roast. Valerie in her designer dress. Celeste sitting stiffly in the corner, eyes a little vacant, wearing the blue shawl I'd given her the year before. When I called her that night, my voice shook. "Did you have a good Christmas dinner?" She paused. "It was fine," she said slowly. Then she lowered her voice, confused. "You weren't there?" God, that hurt that she hadn't even known I wasn't invited, that they'd lied to her, too. I started getting these carefully polite texts from Valerie. "Let's set up a visiting schedule so we don't overwhelm her." What that meant in practice was that I got 2 hours on Sunday afternoons. No flexibility, no privacy, and even then, someone would always just happen to drop in. Connor, Alexa, Gregor, like. They wanted to make sure I couldn't get her alone. To them, I was dangerous. Not because I was stealing anything, but because I was listening to her, because I was making sure her voice actually mattered. Maria, her home health aide, told me once in hushed tones while refilling Grandma's tea. "They don't see her. They see the house, the money. You're the only one who talks to her like she's still here." That was the worst part. Watching Grandma Celeste start to fade little by little. Her body weakening, her memory getting patchy, but her spirit, it was still there. On the good days, she'd squeeze my hand so tight it hurt. She'd look me right in the eyes. "Don't let them decide things for me," she'd whisper. "I see them. I see everything." Those Sundays were everything to me, but they felt like they were slipping away. And the more the family shut me out, the
more determined I became to hold on to her. To remind myself that she wasn't alone. Because the truth is, it wasn't just her they were trying to erase. It was us, our connection, our history, what we meant to each other. And even then, in the middle of all that quiet warfare, I made myself a promise. If she asked me to fight for her, I would, no matter what it cost. When Grandma Celeste finally passed, I didn't even hear it from the family. It was Maria crying on the other end of the line. "Meline," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. She's gone." I remember standing in my cramped apartment kitchen, clutching the counter, trying not to slide to the floor. I didn't even get to say goodbye. By the time I got to her house, Gregor and Valerie were already there, coolly efficient. They were talking with the funeral director about floral arrangements and guest lists like it was a corporate event. Valerie even turned to me with that saccharine voice. "Oh, Meline, we were going to call you." Of course. Of course. At the funeral, they sat me in the third row. Third row behind people who hadn't visited her in 10 years. I sat there twisting the little packet of tissues in my lap, watching Grior get up to deliver the eulogy. He didn't talk about her volunteering at soup kitchens or the way she'd listen for hours about your problems without offering empty platitudes. He talked about Grandpa's business legacy, their family name, assets. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just sat there in my black dress, feeling small, feeling angry, feeling like I'd failed her. Because she always said, "Promise me you'll be there at the end," and they'd made sure I wasn't. The final insult came 2 weeks later. I was chopping vegetables for dinner when my phone buzzed. A text from Alexa. Reading. "Tomorrow at Whitmore's office, 2 p.m. Mom says not to tell Meline." Then immediately, "Sorry, wrong thread. Ignore that, please." I sat down at my tiny table, knife still in my hand, staring at the glowing screen. They hadn't even intended to tell me about the will reading. They were just going to divide everything up like I didn't exist, like I didn't matter. I didn't sleep that night. Part of me wanted to give in, to just let them have it. I never cared about the money. But there was this other voice in my head. Hers, "Don't let them decide things for me." That's what finally pushed me over the edge. By morning, my decision was made. I called in sick at the hospice center, something I never did. I stood in front of my closet for what felt like hours before, settling on a navy blue dress she'd always said made me look professional, not flashy, respectful. I remember my hands shaking on the steering wheel the whole drive downtown. I rehearsed what I'd say if they told me to leave. I thought about turning around at every red light, but I kept going. Because she deserved better than to be ignored in death by the people who ignored her in life. I deserved better than to be shut out. I don't think I've ever felt so alone as I did in that parking garage under Whitmore and Associates, taking deep breaths that didn't seem to fill my lungs, telling myself, "You belong here. You have every right to hear what she wanted. You have every right to be her granddaughter." And eventually I opened the car door. I stepped out and I walked in. The elevator ride up to Whitmore and Associates felt like it lasted a year. I remember the soft ding of the doors opening, the hush of the reception area, the click of my heels on the polished floor. They saw me the moment I walked in. Gregor froze mid-sentence, jaw tightening. Valerie went pale, then composed her face into polite disapproval. Connor and Alexa actually had the nerve to look offended. Valerie spoke first. "Meline, what are you doing here?" I swallowed, forced my voice not to shake. "I'm here for Grandma's will reading." Grior stepped in front of me, blocking my view of the conference room door. "You weren't invited. This is for family." I felt my fingers curl into fists at my side. "I am family," I said quietly. Connor snorted. "You know what he means." But before they could start in on me, the door opened and Mr. Whitmore himself appeared, tall, grey-haired, glasses perched on his nose. He looked us over with the exasperation of a teacher dealing with unruly children. "Are we all here for the Celeste Foster estate?" Valerie gave him her best sweet smile. "Mr. Whitmore, there's a bit of a misunderstanding. Meline wasn't supposed to be here today." He blinked. "Meline Foster, Celeste's granddaughter." I nodded, my throat dry. Yes, sir. He glanced at his clipboard, then frowned. Then she's absolutely supposed to be here. The look on Griot's face was priceless, but I didn't enjoy it. I just felt sick because this was already uglier than I had feared. We filed into the conference room. It was quiet and cold, decorated with dark wood and heavy curtains that blocked out the Boston skyline. I sat near the door, feeling everyone's eyes on me. Their whispers were barely contained. She wasn't even supposed to know about this. How did she find out? Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat, cutting through the tension. Before we begin, let me clarify something. I was not aware that any of Mrs. Foster's belongings had already been distributed. That is highly irregular. Valerie tried to interrupt. We just wanted to save you time. We divided up most of it. He held up a hand stern. That was premature. Nothing should have been touched yet. Then he turned to me. And as for Meline not being invited, he opened the thick vial in front of him, adjusted his glasses, and read. That would be highly irregular given the contents of the will. Gregor leaned forward, voice like poison. What do you mean? Mr. Whitmore didn't even flinch. I mean that her name is the only one in the will. The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. Alexa actually dropped her water bottle onto the floor with a crash. No one moved to pick it up. I could hear my own heart thudding in my ears. Griot's face turned a blotchy red. That's impossible. She was old. She didn't know what she was doing. Mr. Dr. Whitmore's voice stayed perfectly even. She was of sound mind. In fact, she underwent evaluations from 3 separate neurologists over the last year who all certified her mental competence. Valerie started crying. Real tears or the best performance of her life. I'll never know. Connor just stared at me, like he didn't recognize me at all. I sat there frozen. Not triumphant, not gloating, just hollow because this wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want to win. I just wanted her to be heard, and this was the only way she could be. Now, Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat again. If you'd all allow me, I'll read her words exactly as she intended them. He began, I, Celeste Margaret Foster, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. He read every word, legal language, yes, but also her voice. I leave all my property, both real and personal, including but not limited to my primary residence on Beacon Hill, my lake house in New Hampshire, all financial accounts, investments, personal belongings, and family heirlooms to my granddaughter, Meline Rose Foster. There was nothing left to say, but plenty left to feel. And as I sat there, the room filled with the sound of my relatives' disbelief and rage, I realized this was only the beginning. They weren't going to let it go. They weren't going to let me go. And that's when I remembered her last words to me. I see everything and soon I'll make things right. She had in the most spectacular, undeniable way, but the fallout was about to get uglier than I could have imagined. I wish the reading of the will had ended it. That they'd have grumbled and cursed me out in the parking lot, but accepted her decision. That they'd have remembered she was their mother, that she deserved at least that much respect. But of course, they didn't. When Mr. Whitmore finished reading, the room erupted. Valerie was sobbing so hard her mascara ran in jagged black rivers down her cheeks. Griot was red-faced, yelling about undue influence and manipulation. Connor and Alexa just stared at me like I was a stranger who'd walked off the street and stolen everything they'd ever wanted. Mr. Whitmore tried to calm them, but he also made it clear. Mrs. Foster anticipated this reaction. She was exceptionally thorough. She documented everything. Valerie barked out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. Documented what? That Meline tricked her. Mr. Whitmore didn't even blink. Visits, conversations, items removed from the home. She kept a complete inventory with photos. She also installed security cameras 2 years ago that tracked entries and exits, and she saved text messages and emails. Some conversations were even legally recorded. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state, which meant Grandma Celeste could record anyone without telling them. Gregor went silent. Valerie's mouth actually dropped open. Connor looked like he wanted to vanish into the leather chair. Then Whitmore added in that perfectly calm voice of his, "There is also a clause requiring that any items removed without permission be returned within 30 days or face legal action." It was like watching the color drain from their faces because they had taken things. I knew it. They knew it. And apparently so did Grandma. Her jewelry box had been half empty when I'd gone back after the funeral. Her antique clock from the hallway gone. Her crystal figurines missing whole sections. Even the old knitted Afghan her mother had made was gone. They'd taken it all while she was dying like vultures. And now they were realizing it wasn't going to be so easy to get away with it. Of course, it didn't end there. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing non-stop. Voicemails from Valerie weeping and pleading. Texts from Alexa. "I know we haven't been close, but you know that silver set was promised to me." Even Gregor leaving a message that made my skin crawl. "My lawyer will be contacting you. This won't hold up. You're disgusting." They went nuclear and not just privately. Within a week, Alexa posted on social media. Amazing how some people will pretend to care about family just to get what they want. True colors always show eventually. Comments poured in from friends and distant relatives I barely remembered. Some condemning me, some trying to be friendly, suddenly curious about how I was doing. I changed my number, locked down my accounts, but it didn't stop. It even followed me to work. Valerie actually called my hospice supervisor, insinuated I'd been neglecting patients to go flirt with an old woman for her money. My director called me in, her eyes sad. "Amanda, these accusations are obviously baseless, but they're causing problems. Families are worried. You need to take some time." So, I took leave. Not because I wanted to, but because I was falling apart. Insomnia. Panic attacks. I'd wake up sweating in the middle of the night. Convinced I heard Grior pounding on my door. My doctor put me on anti-anxiety meds. My therapist told me, "This is trauma, Meline. Don't minimize it. Family betrayal is its own kind of violence." And she was right because it wasn't just the money. It was that they hated me for doing the one thing Grandma asked me to do, for being the one she trusted. They didn't want her wishes respected. They wanted her silenced. But they'd underestimated Grandma Celeste because while they were busy calling lawyers and smearing my name, I was going through her things. And I found something. A small safe in the back of her closet. The code was her birthday. Inside, a leather-bound journal, several USB drives, and a note in her handwriting for Meline. "Use if necessary." When I opened those files, I realized she'd built a fortress, dates, times, photos of every item she owned. Emails, even video recordings of herself explaining why she was leaving everything to me. Her voice clear. Unmistakable. "If you're watching this, it means things got messy. I'm sorry, but I want you to know I see everything. And I trust you to do what's right." And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Because she hadn't just left me money, she'd left me the truth. She'd left me a way to fight back. I didn't feel brave. Not when I walked into Sarah Donnelly's law office with that box clutched to my chest. Sarah was in her 50s, tough as nails, with eyes that missed nothing and a voice like gravel. She barely blinked when I spilled everything. My family's threats, the online harassment, the work accusations. Then I put the journal and USB drives on her desk. She picked them up like sacred texts. "Your grandmother was very thorough," she finally said. That was one way to put it. She spent hours reviewing everything. The photos of missing heirlooms, the emails where Valerie asked to borrow jewelry she never returned. The camera footage showing Grior sneaking antique paintings out to his SUV. The recordings of Celeste explaining exactly why she was disinheriting them. I remember Sarah leaning back in her chair, tapping a pen against her teeth. "I've never seen a case this well documented." She smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone about to go to war on my behalf. First, she sent formal demands. 30 days. To return every item taken without permission. Valuation spreadsheets attached. Total estimated value over $400,000. Grior's lawyer tried to argue. Sarah shut him down with a single letter that included a handy link to Massachusetts criminal theft statute. Then she filed a motion to dismiss their lawsuit contesting the will. She attached the neurologist certifications, the inventory lists, the videos. One by one, she obliterated every claim of undue influence and mental incompetence. But the best moment, the family meeting she called. She invited them all to her office. Grior, Valerie, Connor, Alexa. Grior brought his lawyer, a pale, twitchy man who kept checking his watch. Sarah didn't even stand up when they arrived. She just clicked her remote and a TV screen on the wall flickered to life. Grandma Celeste's face filled the room. Her hair was thinner, but her eyes were clear. Her voice steady. Today is September 15th. I'm recording this of my own free will. Mr. Whitmore can attest. The camera panned to Mr. Whitmore, confirming the date. Then back to Celeste. I want to explain my decisions. For years, I watched how my family treated me. Who visited? Who asked about my health? Who asked about my money? Silence. Valerie's hand flew to her mouth. Alexa started crying. Grior went pale. Celeste continued, listing specific dates, incidents, conversations. It wasn't emotional. Blackmail. It was evidence undeniable, unforgiving. When the video ended, Sarah let the silence sit. Then she said, "There are 17 more of these, each covering different dates and items removed." She tapped a file. "Here's the complete inventory, including where everything currently is, along with insurance. Appraisals." She paused. "Miss Foster is prepared to file criminal charges for theft if these items aren't returned. Within 7 days. Grior's lawyer mumbled something about emotions running high. After a loss. Sarah didn't even blink. I just sat there, hands shaking, heart pounding, watching them squirm. I wasn't vengeful, but I felt something close to satisfaction. Not because they were afraid, but because finally they had to listen to her. They had to see the truth. The truth they'd tried so hard to bury along with her. When the meeting ended, Gregor's lawyer asked for time to review the evidence. 2 days later, they dropped their lawsuit. Within a week, trucks started arriving at my house in Beacon Hill. Returned paintings, boxes of jewelry, antiques, no notes, no apologies, but they came back piece by piece. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd done right by her. That I'd kept my promise. Don't let them decide things for me. I hadn't. I wouldn't. It would be nice to tell you it ended there. That. Once the lawsuit was dropped, the items returned, the family magically healed. But life's not a fairy tale. Especially not ours. Gregor never spoke to me again. He didn't even pretend to be polite. Valerie tried once, leaving me a shaky voicemail. "I hope you're happy." She'd be devastated to see us fighting like this. I didn't bother replying. Because she was wrong. Grandma Celeste hadn't been blind to this fight. She saw it coming. She planned for it, but not to punish them. She did it so they couldn't punish me. It would have been easy to shut the door. Forever, to keep everything and tell them to rot. God knows they deserved it. But after the adrenaline wore off, I sat alone in that big old house and realized something. I didn't want to be them. I didn't want to be someone who saw family as enemies to conquer. I wanted to be what Celeste had always been to me. So, I made calls, not easy ones, uncomfortable, halting ones. I told them, I'm keeping what she left me. That's not changing. But if there's something of hers that truly means something to you, tell me. Not the jewelry, not the valuable art, but the sentimental things. Alexa surprised me. She asked for Grandma's old recipe book, the one with butter stains and handwritten notes in the margins. She sniffled on the phone. She taught me to make snickerdoodles once. I want to remember her that way. Connor asked for Grandpa's fishing tackle box. He barely choked it out. He took me once when I was little before. You know. Even Valerie eventually called. She asked for one of Celeste's watercolor paintings. A simple sunset. Over the lake. Her voice broke. She painted it the summer before she married your grandfather. I always loved it. I wrapped them carefully, drove them myself, handed them over with no strings attached. Griot refused. Didn't even open the door. And that's on him. I wasn't going to beg him to accept kindness he didn't want. But for the others, it didn't heal everything. Not even close. There were still wounds, still silences, still long pauses on the phone. But it was a start. A crack in the wall we'd all built. Maria hugged me. So hard when I told her. She whispered in my ear, she'd be proud of you. I hope that's true, because those things weren't just heirlooms. They were memory containers, pieces of her, pieces of us. And as I stood in the front hall of that Beacon Hill house, watching Alexa's car pull away with that battered old recipe book on her seat, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Because for the first time since she died, I wasn't guarding a fortress. I was sharing a legacy. Her legacy. After the dust settled, there was still so much to do. Lawyers, paperwork, probate court officially closing the case, naming me the sole heir to everything Grandma Celeste owned. The Beacon Hill house was mine. The lake house in New Hampshire was mine. Every account, every possession mine, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt heavy, like holding someone's last breath in your hands and knowing you can never give it back. 4 weeks, I wandered that big old house alone. It was so quiet without her. I sat in her chair by the window, watching the sun hit the same stained glass panel she loved. I walked the creaking hallway, fingers brushing photos of our family before it fractured. I found an envelope I hadn't noticed before, tucked in the back of her roll-top desk. On the front, in her careful cursive for Meline. After everything is settled, my hands trembled opening it. Inside was a letter. No legal language, no inventory lists, just her. My dearest Meline, if you're reading this, then the storm has passed. Knowing our family, it was probably a Category 5 hurricane. But I had complete faith in your strength, your stubbornness, your sense of what's right. I want you to know something. This was never about punishing them. It was about recognizing the heart that beats in you. The same one your father had. The one I always admired. Money changes people. I've seen it my whole life. It can make them greedy, cruel, small, but in the right hands, it can make room for generosity. For kindness, for freedom. Don't let it change you, Meline. Use it to become even more yourself. Take that trip to Italy we always dreamed about. Start that pediatric hospice program you wanted. Keep the lake house in the family for as long as it deserves to stay. And when the time is right, find ways to include them again. Not because they deserve it, but because connection matters. Set your boundaries. But leave the door open always. I love you. I'm so proud of the woman you've become. Celeste. I sat there crying, the paper going blurry in my hands. She'd known all of it. The fight, the hate, the cost. And she trusted me to carry her hopes anyway. So I did. I took that trip to Italy, walked cobblestone streets in Florence, where her parents were born. I set up the Celeste Foster Memorial Scholarship at my old nursing school specifically for hospice care students. I started the paperwork to create a foundation supporting elderly people without family. I hosted a small dinner in her memory, inviting only those who truly loved her, Maria, Mr. Whitmore, a few neighbors, Alexa, who brought the recipe book to show me. We told stories, we laughed, we cried, and for a moment, it felt like she was there, standing on the porch of that Beacon Hill house, watching the fireflies blink. In the garden she planted decades ago, I whispered into the summer air, we did it, Grandma. We made things right. If you've ever had to stand up for someone you love, if you've ever had to fight for their voice when others tried to silence it, you'll understand why I couldn't back down. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't measured in dollars. It's the lesson that you have the right to honor your own truth and help others do the same. If this story meant something to you, if you want to hear more true life tales of family dynamics, betrayals, and the courage to do what's right, subscribe to Avenged Stories. We have so many more to tell. Thank you for listening.